All right, severe thunderstorms are taking aim at Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas over the next few days. CNN meteorologist Chad Myers has our forecast. How's it looking, Chad?
It looks stormy. More tornadoes on the ground, I think, coming this week as a storm comes over Mexico into Texas today and then eastward from there. This weather's brought to you by Zantac. Eat your way, treat your way. Here it comes out of the southwest, and Mother Nature got the Crayola box out today. From flood watches to blizzard warnings to tornadoes in the south, the west is covered up with warnings. Big time storms out there, lots of snow, blizzard conditions beginning tonight, almost to Denver, Cheyenne, up into the Dakotas. 2 feet of snow, but the wind's going to blow 60. And then storms along the cold front itself off here to the east where the warmer air is. Cold air all the way up into Minnesota. That's where the snow goes for tomorrow. This is a big event for a lot of people. The dark spots, that's 2 feet. You'll never know it with that wind blowing like that. The rain right there in Memphis, that's 3 inches. More flooding there. That means warm weather, though, across the East Coast. Cold in the west, warm in the east. John.
All right, Chad Myers for us. Chad, thank you very much. Thank you to our international viewers for watching. For you, CNN Talk is next. For our U.S. viewers, a growing crisis for Boeing after the Ethiopia Airlines crash. Why is Boeing's most popular selling jet still flying? New Day continues right now.
We're hearing horrific, heart-rending stories of the moment the families heard.
You want to know that there aren't any questions surrounding safety. I would not fly on this plane until we get some answers.
The U.S. is saying we've nothing more to say at the moment. It leaves the traveling public in an intolerable position.
The Speaker is absolutely right. Putting the country through a failed impeachment is not a good idea.
I don't think it further divides the country by any stretch.
We got 3 committees doing investigations. It may very well be that we must impeach. We don't know right now.
This is New Day with Allison Camerata and John Berman.
All right, good morning and welcome to your New Day. New this morning, the FAA and Boeing facing growing questions about why the 737 MAX 8 jet is still flying. An increasing number of countries and airlines have grounded Boeing's best-selling jet after 2 deadly plane crashes involving that new model, 2 crashes in just the last 5 months. The FAA is telling U.S. carriers that they can still fly the plane despite new concerns from union leaders for pilots and flight attendants.
The FAA insists that they will, quote, continuously assess the jet's safety performance as investigators try to figure out what caused this week's crash in Ethiopia minutes after takeoff. Investigators are analyzing the plane's black boxes to see if there is any link between that crash and the Lion Air crash back in October. We're also learning more about those lost in the crash, including a 36-year-old woman on her way to a United Nations conference and a Georgetown law student who was heading back to Kenya for the death of his fiance's mother. CNN's David McKenzie is live in Ethiopia at the site of the plane crash for us. David.
Good morning, Alison. Yes, this is the debris field behind me. All morning up until a few moments ago, they've been picking through that field, trying to get any evidence from the site of this catastrophic crash. And Alison, I spoke to investigators here a short time ago. They said that they felt that the plane might have come at a very vertical angle into the ground because of how deep that crater is in this hillside. The black boxes, the audio and flight recorders are in the hands of Ethiopian Airlines. They are investigating those, hope to analyze them soon because questions mounting about this Boeing 737-800 MAX. The airline manufacturer is standing by that aircraft and the FAA, as you mentioned. But just look at this list of aircraft, airlines, and countries that are grounding these planes. And it's a bit windy here, but China, Singapore, Indonesia, Australia, Ethiopia, the Caymans, Mongolia, EastChartJet. That's just a partial list of all of those countries and airliners that have grounded this brand new type of plane. The Ethiopian Airlines, of course, has done the same. They have a very new fleet. But this crash has shocked them, this nation and this region. You mentioned 21 people from the United Nations died in this horrible crash. They are flying their flags at half staff. They are in shock here. This was a commuter route between Ethiopia and Kenya. And today they hope the NTSB investigators will arrive. We met with an Israeli group of search and rescue who are here with families. Obviously, we need to respect their privacy, but they're trying to get closure here. And so many questions being asked about this type of plane this hour. Alison?
David, thank you very much for being there at the scene and showing us what's happening. Joining us now is Richard Quest, CNN international business correspondent and host of Quest Means Business, and Les Abend. He's a retired American Airlines pilot and author of Paper Wings. Les Abend, you retired from American Airlines. If you were still flying for American Airlines, that's one of the airlines that is still using this 737 MAX 8. Would you feel comfortable flying it today?
No, I would not. I have to be honest with you. I would not feel comfortable with it. Would I feel comfortable with my colleagues that are flying the airplane? A lot of them were my co-pilots. Yes, because I know the training they've gone through. I know they've educated themselves with reference to the particular situation. If we refer back to Lion Air in October, and if they were faced with a similar situation, I have confidence that they'd be able to get the airplane under control.
So, Richard, I mean, let's put up the list of the airlines that are still flying it today, including American Airlines, Southwest, Norwegian. It goes on. Why are they making this choice?
They're making this choice because there's no evidence, in their view, to the contrary. But one has to now say that with the decision of Singapore and Australia to ban the use of these planes within their airspace, the FAA's announcement yesterday looks spectacularly out of touch. The FAA is basically saying we do not have any technical reason to ground these planes, and until we get further evidence, we're not going to. But this is not a matter that's being prosecuted in some technical fashion. This is, as Les just pointed out, this is happening in the court of public opinion. And the FAA is seemingly exceptionally deaf in this today, or it appeared to be, to what the public are saying. The worries about the plane, the worries about whether it's safe, and whilst they wait for some information, everybody else is left saying, well, hang on a second. The Australians say it's not safe. The Singaporeans say it's not safe. The Chinese say it's not safe. You get the idea.
Yes. I mean, so the court of public opinion, yes, and the emotions in the cockpit. I mean, I think it is really telling to have Les say that he would not feel comfortable. You want your pilot feeling comfortable with the machinery, obviously. So, Les, to that end, Boeing announced a flight control software enhancement. Okay, that's what they're doing in response to this. Now, this has been in the works since the Lion Air crash. So they're sending out this, flight control software enhancement. It concerns me because are they rushing to send it out? Was it ready to be sent out? Might this thing be glitchy as well? What do you hear in Boeing's announcement?
Well, it's most of that information is pretty confidential. I know that Boeing has had direct communication with pilots' unions, especially those of the United States. So that might be the reason why some of the foreign countries that are flying this aircraft don't have that direct dialogue. Perhaps Boeing didn't make it that direction, or they did it in some other fashion rather than direct eye to eye. But that being said, a software update seems very curious to me. The timing seems very curious to me. The FAA has to trust the manufacturer to some degree. That's the way our system works. It has to trust the airline. But is this software update going to solve the whole problem? It's hard for me to say. My concern is that the remedy or the Band-Aid that seemed to have been put on this back when Lion Air had their crash back in October, that the bottom line was there's no doubt in my mind that this Ethiopian crew knew about the Lion Air crash and what the remedy for and that particular checklist they had to follow. Were they so overwhelmed with the situation that they just didn't get to it? Or was it possible that they did the remedy and it didn't get the airplane in control?
Richard.
That's what concerns me.
Your thoughts?
This design modification that people are focusing on. It's something of a... It's not totally relevant, and for the simple reason, firstly, this was a design modification that was happening anyway. Secondly, it's a design modification that relates to how the plane tells you about this system, what warnings it gives you. It doesn't make any fundamental changes to how it operates. And thirdly, all this announcement the FAA said yesterday is we're mandating them to tell us by April of 2019. So to the extent that it's not immediately relevant to what we're talking in the sense of Ethiopian Air. I think Les has hit the nail on the head when he says this is really going to be about whether the workaround that was put in place was sufficient, or is this something completely extraneous? What worries me is that, again, I'm sorry to keep coming back to the traveling public, but there are people waking up all over the United States, going to airports, facing a 737 MAX 8 plane, the airline's proudly telling them it's brand new, and they are legitimately entitled to say, why are you flying this plane when other reputable, recognized authorities have said not to?
And Richard, to that point, I am one of that flying public. On Saturday, I am flying with my family. If people are not comfortable when they find out that their plane is a 737 MAX 8, what are they to do?
I have absolutely no idea, frankly. None whatsoever, because if they decide not to take the flight, will the airline reimburse them or put them on another plane? If they decide to fly, that's up to them. We just don't know. And for those reasons, it's not acceptable. Would I fly, would I not fly? I have no doubt about the superb, excellent, par excellence of the safety of the US fleet. But we're not in a normal situation here. We have a divergence of views upon the safety of a brand new plane. It won't be long, by the way. I think Les might agree. We'll get information from this black box as soon as they read it out, and I would say within 5 to 7 days maximum before we are getting some idea of what this is all about.
So, Les, what would you say to passengers who are skittish today about getting on a plane?
Well, seeing that you're getting on the airplane, what I would suggest is that if you know it's a 737 MAX. Talk to the customer service agent and say, listen, I'm uncomfortable. I'd like to change the ticket or wait for another flight. And if they refund you, they refund you. But if I was the airline, I would certainly take that into consideration with my passengers.
I'm sure they're getting lots of those.
It just seems like good
today.
business to me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure they're fielding a lot of those calls, and we'll see how they handle it. Les Abend, Richard Quest, thank you very much for your expertise on this. John.
Up until now, the passengers have had to eat the change costs. And Mary Schiavo, who we spoke to last hour, said, you know what? I would just make that extra payment. I would pay the extra to change flights. I'm that concerned.
Yeah, I mean, and to what everybody has pointed out, it's only a week. They will probably have the answer, maybe even Mary Schiavo said, by the end of this week. So it feels as though airlines could do whatever they need to do for their passengers for the next few days.
All right, there's so many victims from this latest crash. You know, the United Nations lost 21 staffers itself. Joanna Toole was on her way to attend the UN Environment Assembly. The 36-year-old worked for the UN as a fisheries officer. Her colleagues say she was passionate about helping them make the world a better place, and her father said she was, quote, bonkers about animals her entire life.
Kareem Safi was co-chair of the African Diaspora Youth Forum in Europe, which helps support sustainable economic development in Africa. In a message on Facebook, Kareem's colleagues say in part his noble contribution to youth employment will never be forgotten. Kareem leaves behind a fiancée.
Right, Cedric Asiavugwa was a student at Georgetown Law. He was on his way back home to Nairobi after the death of his fiancée's mother. We want to learn more about Cedric right now. We're joined by his former colleague at Georgetown Law, Mary Novak. We're so sorry for the loss to the Georgetown community, and thank you so much for being with us this morning. Mary, if you can, just tell us who Cedric was.
Well, first of all, thank you, John. This is a real horrible loss for the Georgetown University community, and really for humanity itself, given who Cedric was. I work at Georgetown Law School, as you said, in campus ministry. And I knew Cedric well because he was an essential part of our interfaith team. I saw him almost every day as he created a welcoming presence so that students of all faiths and no faith at all could feel supported and welcomed and attended to. He was born in Mombasa, Kenya, into a very strong Catholic family that took his education very seriously. And so he went to the University of Zimbabwe and he graduated with highest honors in philosophy. And it was this intellectual formation that provided the ability for him to see the needs of the world beyond his direct experience. He went on to work in the East African region. He created a community-based organization that served women and children fleeing the war in Somalia. He was the editor-in-chief of a philosophy journal, and all this at the same time, he was producing a peace and reconciliation television program. And he then became a Jesuit for 8 years, and it was during this time that his Catholic faith deepened and his concern for the world broadened.
You mentioned his passion for refugees and people in crisis in war-torn countries. Do you know what his plans were for after graduation?
Absolutely. Well, he brought all of this rich background to Georgetown Law when he came here in 2016, and he began pursuing his joint JD LLM degree. And his intention was to focus on human rights, but as he spent more time involving himself in the various clinics, the human rights clinics here at Georgetown Law, his concern for migrants and refugees fleeing because of climate change and environmental impacts in the East African region was going to be the focus of his advanced law work next year after he graduated with his JD degree.
What a loss. You talked about how important faith was to him, his faith.
Absolutely.
What do you think he would be telling to people right now? What would he say to his friends and to your colleagues at Georgetown Law now feeling his loss?
Well, Cedric loved people and walked always with a broken heart and it was broken by the pain and suffering that we cause each other. But he didn't sit in the midst of his brokenheartedness. His deep faith compelled him into action. So at Georgetown Law, our motto is, law is but the means, justice is the end. And Cedric embodied that in his life. He was really what we hope our students become in the world. He brought his body, mind, and spirit to his life and to his work for the common good. He was 32 years old, and when someone that young passes, we grieve their lost potential. Cedric actually lived that potential his entire life, and as he did, that potential kept expanding.
In that sense, I suppose you can all be grateful for what you had with Cedric,
Absolutely.
while at the same time grieving what you know might have been. Mary Novak, thank you so much for joining us this morning and helping us understand what was lost with the passing of Cedric Asiabugwa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Her words were really poetic there. I mean, and poignant, of course. And seeing his picture, we don't know him, but hearing her words against his picture, look at his beautiful smile, look at his sort of countenance, we get a sense of what he really was like.
And what a difference he made already, just 32 years old.
And just one of 157 lives who were lost. We will continue to cover all of the developments of that plane crash, but we also turn to politics. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says President Trump is, quote, not worth impeaching. Do her fellow Democrats and voters agree? In a Washington Post interview, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made some news when she said on the subject of impeaching President Trump, quote, impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country and he's just not worth it. Joining us now is Abby Phillips, CNN White House correspondent, Jonathan Martin, national political correspondent for the New York Times, and Joshua Green, national correspondent for Bloomberg Business Week. Abby, did this surprise her Democratic colleagues that she felt so basically unequivocal about impeachment that she doesn't want to go down that road?
I don't think it did, in part because I think she's been saying a version of this for some time now. This is the clearest she's ever been about it, because I think she's trying to put her foot down as the speaker about what she thinks is possible for the Democratic Party over the next 2 years. And there's going to be some disagreement, particularly among those younger members of her caucus who came into office, some of them, saying that they are going to impeach Donald Trump. But Nancy Pelosi is looking, she's not even looking at the long game. She's literally looking at the next 2 years, where she's seeing the small likelihood that there's not much of a likelihood in the Senate that you will have bipartisan support for impeachment, because Republicans continue to support the president no matter what happens. That's been true of the last 2 years. She's not wrong that it will probably be true in the subsequent 2 years. It will get harder for her to have this position, of course, when there is more information coming out about the Russia probe potentially. And as these ongoing probes go on in the House, Democrats are going to be trying to unearth things, and it's going to be harder for her to say, no, this is not reaching the bar for impeachment. But her position is based on a desire to actually replace Donald Trump in 2 years, not just attempt to kick him out and inadvertently empower him into a second term. I think that's what she's mainly concerned about for her party, and that's why she's basically said, I don't think that the bar is I don't think that any of the things that I've seen so far rise to the level of impeachment at this point.
What I thought was significant, Josh, was she wasn't just saying it, but she was waving flags around during the interview saying, hey, not only am I saying this, you need to pay attention to the fact I'm saying this. I'm laying down this marker. I want you to know this, and I want you to know it right now. Why?
Well, I think she's doing two things. One, by being so public about it, by putting down a marker. I think she's giving cover for her caucus that might be tortured about how to answer the impeachment question, not wanting to go against their leadership versus not wanting to upset the base, and be able to say, well, look, our leader doesn't go along with it, but I disagree. I think the other thing here, the calculation that Pelosi is making, is that if Democrats were to launch some kind of impeachment effort in earnest, it would blot out everything else on cable news for the next 2 years. And if you looked at the issues that Democrats succeeded on in 2018 elections, healthcare, jobs, the environment, these are the things that Democratic voters care about. All of that stuff would be shunted to secondary status if Democrats were to launch an impeachment proceeding. And it's probably one that wouldn't work, barring some kind of shocking revelation in the Mueller report. There isn't really any obvious path to get the Republican votes in the Senate necessary. So I think Pelosi sees it essentially as a fool's errand.
Well, but she did give herself a big out, J. Mart, where she said, unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming, i.e. the Mueller report. So she's not saying no under any circumstances.
Yeah, I think she's saying no under all the information that we have at the moment, and no pending some kind of a smoking gun. But Josh is right. This is basically a four-word strategy. Don't screw this up. And this is the 2020 election. Look, polls show that nearly 50% of Americans will not vote to reelect Donald Trump. That's a lot of people dug in pretty early on. I think Democrats look at that and they want to take him out at the ballot box for a lot of reasons, but, chief among them, because it's the most legitimate way to counter Trump and Trumpism, and it would not leave any kind of or it would leave less blood on the floor, I should say, than a sort of messy impeachment fight. And given the polarization that we're so, aware of on this show, the fact is that with what we have right now, you're not going to get anywhere near the senators you need on the Republican side to convict him. So why would you just give Trump the opportunity to portray himself as a victim for the next year and a half?
Abby, I could tell you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly what the president and his campaign want to do. They want to run on impeachment. I mean, it is an easy strategy, I think, for the president to be the victim and to have enemies in the entire House of Representatives or among the entire Democratic Party. So that's something that from the president's perspective, they are eager to run on that. That's why when you hear talk of impeachment, it's from Republicans. It's from the president's allies. It's from people who are saying this is all Democrats care about. And to Josh's point, if Democrats don't have an agenda that they are able to pursue over the next 2 years, that will only make the president's job of reelection easier. Nancy Pelosi knows this. President Trump knows this. We'll see, though, whether or not she is successful in sort of taking this off the table, at least in the short term. It is possible that this doesn't really do the trick, that people in her caucus continue to talk about it. They continue to push toward it. Right. And then she has a problem on her hands where it's still in the news every single day, even though it's not happening.
Josh, I wanted to move on, but did you have something you wanted to add to that point?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the other thing when talking to Democratic strategists, the fear with impeachment, not only that it will fail, but that Trump on the ticket is Democratic voters' biggest motivator to turn out in 2020. I think from a raw political standpoint, Democrats want him on the ticket because that's what drives their voters. That's what angers their voters. That's what gets them out to vote, not just for the Democratic nominee, whoever that happens to be, but also for Democratic Senate candidates in all kinds of important states. There's so much at stake that, in a sense, the entire Democratic electoral strategy is built on having Trump on that ticket in 2020.
That's what they wanted in 2016, too, so be careful what you wish for. But go ahead.
Touche.
Abby, I want to talk about Kirsten Gillibrand. I think it's hard to get our minds around what happened there in her office with the sexual harassment claims. So a former staffer claimed that one of her top aides was sexually harassing women. But what I'm finding hard to understand is what he did exactly, because there are things, so at times it says that the specific behavior, this is what Gillibrand says, did not rise to sexual harassment. Well, we kind of need to know what the specific behavior was. And then there's the question of if it was just derogatory comments towards women, where is that on the continuum? You know, some sexual harassment is crystal clear. Roger Ailes, things like that. Then there's the grayer areas, and should everybody lose their jobs over offensive comments, say? And so this one is hard to know who's in the right. Where is Kirsten Gillibrand on this problem?
Yeah, that's such an important point. It really highlights why this issue is so difficult. Broadly, I think, for society, but particularly for Kirsten Gillibrand because of the stand that she's taken on this issue in the Senate, in the body that she's a part of, but also in the military. And she's taken a stand, like she is the senator who has taken a stand on this issue. So it becomes extremely difficult when there is something going on in her own house. We don't know exactly what it is that happened. And I think that we have seen examples in the public sphere of people losing their jobs or losing their place because of inappropriate comments, because there can be inappropriate comments that are so offensive and they make people so uncomfortable in the workplace that it is something that ought to have consequences in the workplace. We just don't know. And for Gillibrand, she's in a tough spot where it's going to be difficult for her to air this out because it involves other people, and she would essentially be kind of putting the information out there without necessarily having the consent of the people involved, and this person having not been sort of convicted of anything, of any kind of crime. But for her, she got into so much hot water with Al Franken and how she helped to push him out that's why this is a problem for her. Democrats are upset. Some Democrats are upset with her about that, and they are looking at this as an example of hypocrisy.
Hey, Jonathan Martin, just very quickly, we have 30 seconds left. Two big 2020 things that I think are interesting developments. Number one, Stacey Abrams flat out saying 2020 is definitely on the table, a run for president, and Beto O'Rourke going to Iowa this weekend, which to me is everything you need to know.
And both bad news for Chuck Schumer, John, of course, who would desperately love both candidates to run for competitive Senate seats, who can raise lots of money for Texas and Georgia. Yeah, Stacey Abrams keeping it on the table, which is, I think, a really fascinating move. Beto O'Rourke moving even closer to a run. We expect him to announce his candidacy later this week and to be in Iowa later this week as well. Keep an eye, guys, on where he goes in Iowa. This is not going to be a sort of Des Moines, Cedar Rapids trip. We think he's going to be in the more rural parts of Iowa, the kind of places where Obama won and then Trump won.
Fascinating to watch. All right, friends, thank you very much. So how are Democratic leaders responding to President Trump's baseless claim that Democrats are anti-Jewish? We're going to ask the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee next.
In the time it takes to...
New reaction this morning from senior Democrats to the announcement, and it really was an announcement from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, where she said she does not want to impeach President Trump. She told the Washington Post, quote, "He is just not worth it." Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Cheri Bustos. She is the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us. And you welcome this announcement from the House Speaker. Why?
Well, I welcome the seeking of the truth. And I think what Speaker Pelosi is saying is that we've got a lot of work to do. We've got to bring down the cost of health care. We've got to rebuild our nation with a real $1 trillion infrastructure package. We just passed the For the People Act last week to try to clean up the mess in Washington. So we've got a lot of work to do. I think what she's saying is let's not be distracted by these everyday pieces of information that are coming up until it all comes together. If Robert Mueller's report shows a clear violation of the Constitution and clearly shows that President Trump has got in the way of democracy in a way that's impeachable, that's a whole other story. But what she's saying is let's stay focused on what we need to get done for the American people.
Do you feel as if the talk about impeachment up until now has been a distraction from the Democratic agenda?
Well, John, here's the reality. We saw Michael Cohen testifying, and it literally sucked up every bit of air in this building. And at that same time, we were doing hearings on health care. We were talking about how we're going to bring down the price of prescription drugs. We have begun outside of the hearing room talking about how we are going to pass a real infrastructure bill to rebuild our country. So we are talking about all of that, and we're actually having hearings on those very, very important topics. Yet, I'm guessing most of your viewers would have no idea that that is even going on right now.
Our viewers pay very close attention to everything. I wouldn't underplay
I don't want to question their
intelligence right now.
They probably know everything that's going on.
Does it seem to you that what the House Speaker is trying to do is maybe downplay expectations a little bit from the Mueller report?
No, I don't think that's it at all. She doesn't know what's in the Mueller report. I don't know what's in the Mueller report. Adam Schiff, who's chair of the Intelligence Committee, doesn't know what's in the Mueller report. We will know when Robert Mueller releases that, and then there's only going to be a select few number of people who will know that. We will be passing a resolution that says the Mueller report should be made public.
Right.
I think that is very important. I believe, look, we've invested almost 2 years of our resources, of our time, energy, effort, money to get to the bottom of this. And I believe the American public deserves to know what that report says.
Last question on this. It is your job to get your fellow Democratic members reelected, and you know a lot of them ran on wanting to impeach the president. So what do you tell to them this morning?
Well, I would say also a lot of them ran on just having this ability to seek the truth. I'm one of 31 Democrats that comes from a district that Donald Trump won. I can tell you we don't go home talking about impeachment every weekend. And not only that, we don't hear from people that we represent talking about impeachment at every turn. They're talking about how we can play a role in helping their families have better lives, how their kids aren't faced with this tremendous student loan debt that we'll be talking about here in Congress later today. They just want to make sure that their families have an opportunity to succeed. This is not something that they obsess about every day back in districts like the one I represent.
So you worked in journalism, which I think is cool, and a lot of people don't know. You also worked in the healthcare industry for some time. And the president proposed his new budget yesterday, which includes reductions in growth to Medicare. Which is something that he vowed when he was campaigning that he wouldn't cut. So how do you view that?
Well, if I could quote my 85-year-old mother who calls me and leaves me voice messages and says, "Don't let them touch my Medicare," I think my mom speaks for people in their 80s and their 70s and their mid-60s all over this country. Medicare is a program that works. It is handled cost effectively. It's got the lowest oversight of any health insurance program in the country, and it works. It is also Social Security and Medicare together are the greatest lifters out of poverty in the history of our nation. And basically what Donald Trump is doing is he is robbing the Peter Medicare part of it to pay the basically pad Paul's stock portfolio. You know, I mean, it is literally, that's what he's doing, taking from people who need something and giving it to others who don't need it as much.
So you don't like what the president's proposing on Medicare. On the other hand, you don't necessarily like what some of your fellow Democrats, particularly the ones who are running for president, want to do with Medicare either. You have concerns about Medicare for all. You told The Hill in an interview, I think the $33 trillion price tag for Medicare for all is a little scary. What's scary?
Well, here's what I can tell you. I worked in healthcare, as you said, John, but I worked in healthcare before the Affordable Care Act, during it, and after. So I know the unsustainable path that we were on in healthcare. Prices were going up way too high, and yet the patient outcomes were not improving. And then we passed the Affordable Care Act, and while it was flawed in the rollout, what ended up happening until the Republicans took their meat cleaver to it, we insured an additional 22 million Americans. So let's not lose sight of the fact that the Affordable Care Act is something that works. It needs tweaking, it needs perfecting. But all of a sudden to just say we're going to throw that out, and along with throwing out the health insurance plans for millions of employees who get their health insurance through their workplace, and all of a sudden turn to something that I don't think it's a policy that we have all of the details thought out. So what I would say to the Medicare for All proponents, or for people who just want to make sure that we have care for all, is that there are a lot of different ideas on the table. Let's just make sure we're doing everything we can so people have access to affordable